The Nerdcast Empire is on the air. It is Music Weekly once again on the Nerdcast Empire. I am Matt in the studio as we are each and every Sunday with the best in rock and heavy metal music news and, of course, some of the new releases that you're going to need to check out as we do each and every Sunday here on twitch.tv live on our Nerdcast Empire channel. Great to have you along with us once again, and I want to say thanks to all of our new followers. We are up to now 20 followers on Twitch, so we are closing in on our goal of 50 followers, which will allow us to monetize the channel.
Let's keep it going.
And do more really cool things. That voice of that other guy you heard is right across from me. That is Mike in the studio once again this week. Mike, how's it going?
It is going great. Had a pretty good week as far as music goes. Little something for everyone, I think. Depending on what you're into, we had the blues rock supergroup Black Country Communion with a new one. We had metal legend Axel Rudy Pell with his 22nd album. A couple really cool traditional metal releases from bands like Angel Sword and Lucifer's Hammer, which also sound like really cool in-game weapons in a role-playing game. On Lap, a French band doing some modern alternative rock, LA Strip era rock from the Australian band Shotgun Mistress, and some post-hardcore goodness from Standstill. So if you like heavy music, there was something for you to enjoy on June 14th.
I think it's required to have both the Angel Sword and Lucifer's Hammer if you're going to beat Elden Ring. I think that's not to spoil the new DLC, but I think you're going to need both of those items if you're going to be able to get through that.
Great names. Great names.
No question about it. A lot of great stuff this week. I feel like last week that was a little bit thinner because a couple weeks ago we just had a monster week. I feel like this was a nice bounce back this week. Really good stuff. We'll be talking about some of those new bands or bands with new releases, and these releases are as of June the 14th. And, of course, we'll post the link to Mike's video in the channel. Of course, Mike each and every week will go through and pull songs from all the releases. There you see that list right there. And you'll be able to go through and make your own list of some of the best releases. And it really is all across the spectrum of rock and metal. If you like death metal, if you like, melodic metal, pretty much everything in between, there's probably something for you on this playlist. So definitely check that out, and we'll tell you what we liked from this week. Chris is joining us in the chat, holding down the chat once again from Parts Unknown, helping us out, helping us try to find some more followers on this Twitch channel so that we can make our way up to 50 followers before too long. So really good stuff again this week. We're going to start off with some music news. Unfortunately, we got to start off with some bad news in the world of music this week. And that's the news that legendary record producer Peter Collins passed away today, I believe, at the age of 73. This man has done just about everything. He has worked with so many artists and so many different genres of music, best known for working with Rush and Queensryche, also worked with Alice Cooper, but he was kind of involved with the big swing revival of the late 1990s. He worked with the Brian Setzer Orchestra on some of their big albums when that came back. In fact, he continued to work with Brian Setzer. But people from Kenny Loggins, Lisa Loeb, Stray Cats 40 was the last album he worked on. That was in 2019. But obviously, for people who listen to this podcast, and certainly for my partner here, I know that probably his biggest claim to fame was his work on Operation Mindcrime, Here in the Now Frontier, a lot of the big Queensryche albums. You see the outpouring of condolences just tells you how important this guy was to the music industry.
Yeah, it's almost staggering how many albums this guy worked on, and certainly as far as my music taste goes, you can't get much more important than Operation Mindcrime and Empire, both just huge Queensryche albums. And yeah, I mean, you had everyone from Geddy Lee to Mike Portnoy reaching out and, commenting on how influential the guy was. I guess he also worked on Mike Portnoy's Flying Colors album. Just a big loss for sure.
First album he was working on was the Lambrettas back in 1980, Beat Boys in the Jet Age. Worked on their first couple albums, and that kind of got him in the door, it looked like, with the music industry. Worked on Air Supply self-titled in 1985. Again, a lot of the Rush albums. He was really credited with helping Rush get back to that harder rock sound in the mid to late 80s when they had really kind of gotten maybe a little bit too far off onto the prog end of prog rock, and they kind of zeroed back in with some of their releases like Power Windows and Hold Your Fire, Counterparts in 1993. And then again, he was involved in a lot of big acts of the late 90s. I mentioned Brian Setzer, and he was involved with Sean Mullins' album, which, of course, Lullaby is probably the big song that came off of that. Jules Spirit in 1998. Lisa Loeb in 2002. So he even worked on one of Rick Astley's new releases in 2005. So clearly a guy that not only was incredibly important to some of the bands that we spotlight on this podcast when we go into the vault, but really kind of at the forefront of the music industry in the late 80s when it came to like pop rock. He was the guy they were calling upon to go into the studio to try to finish these albums off and really make them what they could be. So just really, really sad news. Some comments from Geddy Lee and Alex Lifeson, obviously. Mike Portnoy came in with some comments as well. And you know, Portnoy certainly influenced by those Queensryche albums. Really set up what he did with Dream Theater. But certainly sad news. Man, nicknamed Mr. Big, dead at the age of 73. Not the Mr. Big, as far as I know, from Wayne's World. But
Probably not.
But probably, I don't want to say it was patterned after him, but someone like that is, you know, when you're talking record producer that's looking for those next big acts,
Sure.
Something like that. Certainly big news there. But so a little bit of a down story for sure to kind of start things off. So let's bounce back with a couple of other news items. A band that kind of burst onto the scene in the mid-2000s thanks to the European Song Contest Eurovision. Lordi, we got news from Mr. Lordi, the head of Lordi himself, that a new album is already done, mixed, and mastered. Of course, they kind of came onto the scene in 2006 when Finland and Lordi, representing Finland, won Eurovision with Hard Rock Hallelujah. But if people haven't listened to it, maybe that's the only exposure people had. These guys are really good, and it's kind of exciting to hear they've got a new album on the way.
Yeah, that whole album back from 2006, The Apocalypse, was actually really entertaining. I kind of dropped off a bit and didn't follow them too closely after that. I did check out their album from last year, Screamwriters Guild, which was certainly fine. I remember them also more for having like the weird beef with Guar because, you know, they're both ridiculous bands wearing outfits. And,
Sure.
You know, that's just going to happen, I suppose. But yeah, it's funny to me kind of going through this article when they talk about how upset so many people in Finland were when different media outlets were like publishing pictures of these guys without their outfits on, like trying to you know, show their true identity. And that evidently was, this band had enough of a following where that was a big deal. Like, how dare you do that?
Yeah, in fact, Reuters reported at the time that nearly 200,000 Finns had signed an online petition complaining about them using photos of them without their costumes on. So if we haven't learned anything else from this podcast, is they are serious about their metal music in Finland. So you don't want to make 200,000 Finnish metal fans angry or they'll come after you. Yeah,
with online petitions, which, you know, that's a thing, I suppose.
It's a very civil way to go about it.
Yeah, well, you know, it's a universal thing that we all think that if we post our name online on change.org, we can actually do something. But it's cool to see something like this, nothing too serious, but that kind of support for a band like that.
Also kind of makes you wonder if that was one of the early online petitions in 2006. It had to have been at the forefront of the early.
Like that did kind of predate you hearing about online petitions.
And maybe there was a Finnish version of change.org where that was posted. But great to see Lordi continuing to make music, so we'll keep an eye on that. Of course, Mr. Lordi, 50 years old now, so continuing to rock along. That's great to see, but we'll keep you updated.
Why don't we have something like Eurovision?
That's a great question. I mean,
I understand we ourselves are not a continent, but still.
The Nerdcast Empire revision. But, you know, I think I'm really not sure because, I mean, first off, most of the music would probably be bad.
That's true.
It wouldn't be the bands that we're listening to each and every week on this podcast. It would be...
But something similar could happen where you could essentially just nominate a rock band from every state and do some sort of major competition that way.
And I would have believed before we started this podcast that was not feasible, that you couldn't find like a rock band from every state. But yeah. I now know that, or at least a new rock band. I mean, there's probably classic rock bands still rolling from every state. But we now know doing this podcast that there probably is newer acts from all across the country that would actually make this an interesting competition.
Yeah, and I going through this week's picks in particular, I was thinking, like, we run into all these bands who found influence in a lot of the groups that we liked from back in the day, but it's like they don't get that same kind of exposure that those bands got. Like the bands who were inspired by the 60s bands, they were big deals, and now you're at the point where there are a lot of people drawing inspiration from bands from the 80s and 90s, and they kind of grew into this market that isn't anywhere near as lucrative or important.
Well, in the end, you almost have to go overseas to find an audience because, I mean, you were watching two different online festivals that were being held this weekend. That's something we probably could have mentioned.
Had Hellfest.
Yeah.
And then the Grosspop Metal Meeting, which I think was the week before. But, yeah, they were actually, there's like the Arte YouTube channel that was streaming a lot of the bands live. It was really cool.
Yeah, and then, you see the crowds at these festivals overseas, and it's just people as far as the eye can see to come watch these metal bands. I mean, obviously there are other bands there as well, but I mean, these are bands that you and I would go watch in some concert venue here, and they draw 50 people, and there's 300,000 people watching them in some festival in Europe.
Exactly. Like I mentioned, we had Hellfest, which was in Clisson, France, from the 27th to the 30th, so it ended tonight. Then the Grasspop Metal Meeting, that is, once I accept cookies, I'll see where that, let's see.
Metal Meeting sounds so, like, formal.
It's, I'm trying to remember. I want to say it's in Belgium, but.
Okay, I think you did say it was a Belgium event, but.
Tickets? I don't know. Like, just tell me where it's at. Ticketmaster.be. So, yeah, probably.
Yeah, well, I would say you're probably right. But, yeah, I wish there was that kind of support. Chris mentioned you want to be a rock star that aired at one point over here that Tommy Lee was involved in. What I don't understand is so many of these networks are looking for these summer fill-in shows. Like, what would be better than to do some sort of summer fill-in show with rock bands from every state? I mean, do we need another season of The Voice or American Idol or whatever these other ones are? It's just like celebrities mostly that are involved in that. Like
that's the market I don't understand. I want to hear people sing, but only if they're celebrities wearing masks.
Right, and people who don't sing for a living.
Like, why? There are so many really great singers out there that you've never heard before with full bands that could perform live on television. Why aren't we doing that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Maybe some TV executive out there could make that happen. But yeah, that's certainly interesting thought. One other quick news story before we get to our bands this week, and it was one that kind of came up last week. We didn't get a chance to talk about it. The news that Marty Friedman's autobiography coming out, Dreaming Japanese, scheduled for a December 3rd release via Permuted Press. And it's interesting because he is definitely, as far as what I have seen from Marty Friedman, I'm sure you have more of a perspective as a longtime Megadeth fan and longtime Marty Friedman fan. He just doesn't strike me as the kind of guy who's going to throw a bunch of people under the bus in an autobiography. So that almost makes me more interested in reading this because it's not what you see in the average blabbermouth weekly news run where it's just people complaining about people. I saw that at least one thing he's going to talk about is what it's like as a foreigner to basically become a musician in Japan and kind of maybe at first be shunned, but then eventually be embraced the way he has. But to me, this is going to be a must-read for any metal fan, but certainly if you're a fan of his or of Megadeth or any other bands from that era.
Yeah, the guy's had such a fascinating life and career. You think prior to Megadeth being in Cacophony with Jason Becker, who obviously is another story altogether.
Yeah.
The fact that, he came into Megadeth as this virtuoso guitarist, produced some of Megadeth's best work with them, left the band, and to this day still remains on good terms with Dave Mustaine, which, if you can do that, that's an accomplishment in and of itself. But to think that this good dude just up and left, went to Japan, and fully immersed himself in Japanese lifestyle and the music industry, and has come out the other side as kind of a hero. Like, he's such a huge deal, and it'll be interesting to get his perspective on all of that, because it's been such a really interesting ride following his career. I can't wait to read it.
Yeah, Chris mentioned doing a live read. I think definitely we can find some interesting passages from it and definitely share that on the podcast because I think he's going to have a very different perspective than most in the industry. So I'm very interested to read that, and I would love to see him in concert again because last time we saw him, they absolutely killed it. So really good stuff. Of course, we talked about his new album a couple weeks ago, so definitely check that out as well, and check out his autobiography when it comes out in December. So that's kind of the news items we have at the top of our program. You're listening to Music Weekly. This is our 20th episode of Music Weekly here on the Nerdcast Empire. And just to kind of run down for those who might be new, kind of how this all works. Again, each week Mike puts together a list, actually compiles a couple of lists of all the new album releases for a given week, and then we'll pull tracks from each of those albums, and then we review them over the course of a week, and then we'll each pick 2 new releases that are our best, and I'm not sure what that noise was on my computer. I thought I had everything closed that made noises, but we'll try to figure that out. But we'll go through and try to pick at least 2 bands, sometimes more. A couple weeks ago, we had some bonus bands, but generally we pick 2 bands each that we really like their releases. This time we're talking about the music of June the 14th. And again, Mike posted the link to the YouTube playlist. If you're watching on YouTube and the VOD, we'll have that link probably when Mike posted that original YouTube link. So check the video for that to find that. And then we'll play part of the tracks to kind of give you a taste of what that music sounds like. And again, really good stuff this week. And then we'll take a break for the podcast listeners, and then we'll come back and do Music from the Vault, where we each talk about a classic album. Again, if you're listening, or if you're watching us live, if you're watching on the Twitch VOD, if you're watching on the YouTube VOD, you should get the music clips, at least most of them. If you're listening on the podcast version, you're going to have to go to Twitch or YouTube. And then one final reminder, if you're on Twitch, whether it's live or on the VOD, please consider dropping us a follow. We are up to 20 followers now. We are on our way to 50. So we really appreciate everybody who has followed along with the Nerdcast Empire. Now, with that entire spiel said, it's time to get to the music this week. Mike, we'll let you kick off the music picks as always. So what is your first pick of the week?
Absolutely. Like I mentioned prior to this, I could have gone in so many directions this week. There were so many just quality albums. And with that in mind, I kind of narrowed it down to a few choices. And for my first choice, I'm going with the second full-length album from a Seattle, Washington heavy metal band. This band originally formed in 2009 as Rising, a Dio tribute band. In 2014, they became the band RivetSkull, and the album in question is their newest one, Absence of Time.
Your picks this week definitely have some interesting names. They've not just your basic boring band names. They have definitely kind of gone outside the box to find something unique.
Yeah, I kind of feel like these guys had a long time to figure out what they wanted that name to be, having spent so much time together prior as this tribute band. But as their website kind of explains their formation as RivetSkull, they embarked on an odyssey of sonic exploration, melding the raw power of their heavy metal roots with a kaleidoscope of eclectic influences. They forged a fusion of tradition and innovation. And yeah, I think that sums them up fairly well. The band's comprised of members with vast experience in the industry, both playing in prior tribute acts and even the lead singer owning a studio and live music venue back in Seattle prior to moving to L.A. The singer/keyboardist Chad McMurray cites studying for years under vocal coach Maestro David Kyle, who worked with such names as Lane Staley, Chris Cornell, Ann Wilson, and Jeff Tate.
Okay.
So clearly when you want to be this great tribute vocalist, why not work with the guy who trained so many just legendary vocalists?
Seems reasonable to me. A lot of them out of Seattle also.
Yeah, absolutely, which is kind of interesting because people always, and we've talked about this before, equate Seattle as being the grunge mecca, and it certainly was, but these guys definitely draw that influence from Heart and Queensryche too, two huge Seattle area bands.
Yeah.
Their guitarist, Mark X. Plog, he was a mainstay in the Houston music scene back as early as the mid-'80s, where his band Guardian played shows with King's X, Pantera, and Hellstar. He eventually moved to Seattle and joined up with Chad McMurray for their tribute band Rising, moving into RivetSkull. The bassist holds a computer science degree, Mark Hopkins, and he worked for Microsoft. Played in several bands throughout the 90s and 2000s. Growing up in a town that spawned Heart and Queensryche, Hart actually went to his high school and spoke about life as a professional musician, and evidently that had a really big impression on him for his future aspirations.
It clearly didn't scare him off, which was good.
No, not at all. And finally, their drummer, Michael Robson, he's also a veteran of the Seattle music scene, playing all styles of music, but clearly found his home in this really kind of traditional modern metal band that we have here with RivetSkull.
Yeah, it is. I'm definitely interested to hear a little bit from them. What did you like from this album?
So yeah, the video that I picked for the playlist, Hellbound, that was actually what got me interested at first because the video was just cool. Inspired by Five Nights at Freddy's. Just a really cool video, and their sound plus the video really got me into the rest of their stuff. You can certainly hear Dio in Chad's voice. Like, it's clear that's his major inspiration, but I don't think it really feels like a ripoff or anything. It just, the guy can really sing. Standout tracks on this album include Hellbound, Isolation, Never Gonna Run, Eyes of a Fallen Angel, The King is Dead, and Time Will Tell. The track I picked out for sampling is Hellbound.
So we'll definitely check that out now, as we do each and every week. Again, this is from RivetSkull and the album Absence of Time. This is Hellbound from RivetSkull, so we will check that out now. Yeah, I really, really dug that, and definitely the video, the production quality of the video was really outstanding. As you mentioned, the Five Nights at Freddy's homage, which was really cool. But they clearly went all in for the video. Like, it was really well put together. It didn't feel cheap at all. And Chris mentioned a little young Vince Neil in there. Yeah, I think. Certainly the good parts of Vince Neil.
But those screams definitely had a Vince Neil feel, for sure.
Yeah, but like you said, it's just, they've got a great sound. Guitarist sounds great. The solo there, I wanted to play a little bit more of that. Just really good. So
I saw an interview on one website that I don't remember what it was now, but I think they even kind of mentioned the fact that part of the inspiration of the video was just trying to find ways to get their music heard and seen, and you got to kind of go all out a little bit because, as a rock band that's been around quite a while, since 2014 in this current form, like, it's not like they're brand new. Like, how do you get new ears listening to you?
I mean, that's something we talk about all the time. A lot of these bands have been doing this a long time and have mostly lived in obscurity. So, like, how do you break through when you've been around and maybe haven't been able to do that yet? And this is certainly an interesting way to do it.
And probably doubly frustrating because as their tribute band, I think they had a fair amount of success as far as tribute bands go, like touring in Europe and everything. So it's got to be weird when you decide, hey, we're going to go full on original material. How do we build on that prior notoriety?
Make sure I'll post the link to that album on YouTube Music. But yeah, definitely check out RivetSkull, Absence of Time. I'm kind of excited to be able to check out the rest of this album, but they've got a really good sound. So certainly a good way to start off our first choice of the week. Again, music from June the 14th. As always, you have two picks. So what do you have for pick number 2?
Yeah, so pick number 2 was even more of a wild card, I think. It was one that, in going through my playlist, the video just caught my attention for being certainly not inspired by Five Nights at Freddy's, but just being really different and strange. But again, it caught my attention, and the music was kind of like like a hymn song if him was more worried about the musical composition of the track. That's really the best way I can think to describe it. But this is the latest release from a gothic metal project from J.L. Trable, who's the guitarist from a melodic death metal band, Dawn of Tears. This project is called Sun Descends Alone, and the album is Of Everlasting Cravings.
One thing very noticeable right off the bat is that visual on the album cover. You definitely get like I don't want to say like pentagram, but like they're clearly going for some sort of like star over the sun sort of thing. So it definitely has that like metal.
It kind of has this like blood moon, like if you're looking through trees, looking up at it. Maybe if I had to guess what it was, you can kind of see what looks like maybe twigs obscuring your view.
Yeah.
That's my assumption as to what it is. But yeah, it certainly fits with the video for the song Ardent Hearts, which is the track that I had on the playlist, which may have been a little softer than what I typically listen to, but it had me interested in hearing more for sure. I also even went after his death metal band, Dawn of Tears. I checked them out on YouTube just to hear kind of, after listening to this, what his normal work sounds like. And very cool technical death metal band. I think if I was a little more into death metal vocals, I'd really, really enjoy it. But if that's something that you're into, you should check them out because they sounded really good. What I like about this is the song titles feel like a mix of like a sentenced album or Typo Negative. You have Cross My Heart and Hope to Die, Love You to the Grave, like very, very much in that vein. It seems odd for a death metal guitarist to release something like this, but then when you kind of look into them a little more, and after hearing them, it's like the Metal Archives lists his death metal band's themes, including macabre, fantasy, and darkness. So clearly, this is kind of right up this guy's alley when he's not being super heavy. It's not quite the same as playing a saxophone to death metal, which
we saw that this week,
which has happened in the past as well. But yeah, if you're a fan of him and kind of like that more almost theatrical gothic metal, then this would definitely be something you'd be into. Standout tracks to me were Shelter, Once, Ardent Hearts, Cross My Heart and Hope to Die, Once, and Love You to the Grave. The track for sampling that I picked out is the song Once.
So we're going to check that out now. Once from Sun Descends Alone from the album Of Everlasting Cravings. Let's check out Once now here on the Nerdcast Empire.
One soul that screams of angels beating as one, and all these misadventures shatter poison hearts. I'm standing in a failing oblivion, serenades of radiance, fragments of a dying sun.
Yeah, I definitely hear the hymn. Like, that is very theatrically over the top. Not to a point where it's too much over the top, but there's no way that's not an influence because it definitely feels like what you get when you're listening to him.
It's like him without as much of the pop sensibility that I think he had with his music. Definitely hear some sentenced in there as well. Yeah, it's him, but generally, like most of it's more piano driven, almost like classical feeling, but not something I'd probably cruise around to, but definitely a cool change of pace.
Yeah, it was really interesting to get to hear what I've gotten to hear of this so far, and certainly interesting to hear more of it, and check out his main band as well. So that's it's always interesting to see when you have these artists. I mean, you joked about the saxophone playing lead singer of that death metal band. It's like, this guy's a classically trained saxophonist, but he loves death metal, so he's got to create a death metal band because he just doesn't get his fulfilled by playing classical saxophone. Like, it's interesting, these music these guys are clearly so multidimensional that it's like one genre just doesn't completely fulfill what they're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. And for the record, the band in question is Wound Collector.
Yes.
Check out their newest album, Begging for Chicxulub.
I still don't know what that is.
I'm not sure what that is. They're a Belgian band. Just typical death metal, but the lead singer is a saxophonist, and he definitely just busts out some crazy sax solos in the middle of the song. I love it for the originality and just something that you never hear.
Yeah, if you're into that type of music, because like the song wasn't really like my thing. It really was only like interesting because of the saxophone part. They're very talented. It's just not my favorite type of music. But I give them credit for finding a way to. It's weird to watch a music video and there's the lead singer holding a saxophone, singing growling vocals at the same time. Like that blows your mind.
Yeah, and watching the video, that was the first thing that jumped out. It's like, wait, why is he holding a saxophone? Is he really? There's no way. Are you serious? And then sure enough, he just starts going to town. It's incredible.
Yeah, it's wild. So definitely check them out. But also, check out the Mike's actual pick, which was not that band. That was Sun Descends Alone with Of Everlasting Cravings. Really good stuff from them. So check them out. I had 2 picks as well this week, and thought I was going to end up with two Frontiers bands, but I actually found a second band that I really liked this week that was not a Frontiers band. But the first one was just so over the top and ridiculous, I couldn't resist. This is a band called New Horizon, and their album is called Conquerors. As you would expect, or maybe I don't know if you'd expect it or not, when you talk about Conquerors, this whole album is about historical and biblical beings and kind of what they were involved in their history. And it's so over the top and so much fun. This is a Swedish melodic metal band founded in 2020. This is their second full-length album after Gate of the Gods in 2022. It's a new lineup. Niles Mullen coming in from Dynasty, and Amaranth is joining Jonah T for the album. It's just over the top and just in such a good way. The music is great. The lyrics are ridiculous. I mean, they're great, but they're, you're singing about these historical figures, and it's just wild. I mean, just reading the tracks off of this album, you got tracks like King of Kings, Daimyo, Shadow Warrior, Apollo.
The King.
The
King of Kings.
Yeah, it was not about Triple H, as it turns out. Messenger of the Stars, Before the Dawn, Edge of Insanity, and the track we're going to play, which is Alexander the Great, 356 to 323 BC. That's the full length of the full name of the track. But this was great. My favorite tracks were Against All Odds, Daimyo, King of Kings, and Alexander the Great, which we're going to play for you. But this is, we talk about things being over the top. This is over the top in the best possible way. And
is the one song about the famed conqueror Phil Collins?
Maybe, possibly. I'm not 100% sure, but it's really, really great stuff. So definitely want to check that out. And we're going to check out Alexander the Great, the ending track, 8 minutes and 46 seconds, just to round out the album. But it's just so over the top. It's so much fun. So let's check that out now. From New Horizon and their album Conquerors, this is Alexander the Great, 356 to 323 BC.
Was born a son, debatable Macedon. The legend, his name was Alexander. At the age of 19, he became the Macedon king. And he swore to free all of Asia Minor by the ancient sea in a 334 BC. He actually beat the armies of Persia. Alexander the Great, his name struck fear into hearts of men. Alexander the Great became a legend amongst mortal men.
It's just so over the top in the best possible way. Chris compared it to the new birthday song from Aqua Teen, Hunger Force, which I totally kind of get that. But I like I love the album, but I got to that song and this was just on a totally different level of ridiculousness that it was so amazing. I loved it. I love this whole album. Definitely check out New Horizon, Conquerors. Mike, your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to sing about these historical figures and, you know, conquerors and anything of that nature, you have to go over the top with it. I don't think you can kind of just like half effort that kind of thing. I think this was an instance where the song I picked for the playlist didn't quite do these guys justice. The song that I put on the playlist was the song Apollo, which is kind of about who was going to conquer space, whether it be us or the Soviets. And it didn't feel like the right kind of cheesy to me, really, compared to some of the other tracks. And I didn't jump right back into these guys, and I really regret it because the rest of the album just kind of rips.
Yeah, it was so good. The reviews of it were so excellent as well, and it's even some of these websites we go to that typically kind of crap on stuff, like we're just effusive in their praise. So definitely check those guys out. New Horizon with Conquerors. It was just, like I said, all kinds of fun, and I love fun in music. So definitely check that out. Last band I picked for this week, I really enjoyed these guys as well. This is Sunburst with the album Manifesto. This was one that kind of flew under the radar when I was going through the music, but as I listened to the whole album, I just really enjoyed these guys' sound. They're from Larissa in Greece. They're a power metal quartet. Founded back in 2010. This is only their second full-length album. Fragment of Creation was released in 2016. The Prog Mind called it pure-blooded progressive metal. I think that's a great way to describe it. Like it is, if you love progressive metal, you're going to love what these guys put out. And this album is just really, really good start to finish. I didn't find any weak tracks in there. It's really outstanding. My favorite tracks were From the Cradle to the Grave, Hollow Lies, and the track we're going to listen to a bit of, The Flood. Just really good stuff, again, from a band that I would have known nothing about if not for this podcast. But we're going to get a chance to listen to a little bit of Sunburst. Again, this is off the album Manifesto, and this is the track The Flood. So let's check that out now. You definitely hear the progressive nature of the guitars, especially in that little solo piece right at the very end. But got great harmonies, which I really enjoyed. And just, again, kind of an over-the-top sound, very progressive, and kind of right up the alley of the stuff that I like to pick for this podcast. So really enjoyed Sunburst Manifesto. Mike, your thoughts?
Yeah, I really enjoyed this as well. Definitely cool, progressive. It's like kind of power metal, kind of symphonic, but not overwhelming in those areas. Progressive Subway kind of made that point where they incorporate that symphonic sound, but it's not really a defining presence within the sound of the band. I definitely felt more of a progressive metal. The guitar tone to me has that like progressive signature to it. And the guitar work, I think Progressive Subway mentioned it, and even their Bandcamp mentioned Symphony X, and there is a bit of like Michael Romeo's guitar work that you feel almost that neoclassical style in their music, which is also really cool.
Yeah, I thought these guys really did a great job with the second release, and again, another one of those bands that I saw a lot of really positive reviews on, even some of the sites that aren't always like over-the-top positive, just liked their first album, but really thought this one took it to a whole different level, so great job for those guys. Sunburst with Manifesto. Those are our new picks for this week. If you're listening on the podcast version of this podcast, we're going to step aside for a break. When we come back, we're going to take you into the vault where we are going to go through and give you a couple of classic albums you need to check out. We'll do that on the other side of this time out here on the Nerdcast Empire. Back on the Nerdcast Empire, live on Twitch, as we are each and every Sunday. Don't forget to check out our website, nerdcastempire.com. We've got our Nerdcast Empire store there that you can pick up some merch while you're there. You can listen to any of our previous podcasts by going through our website. All of them are also on our podcast providers. Wherever you get your podcasts, you can download and listen to the Nerdcast Empire. Just a reminder, we will not be here Thursday for Anime Weekly or Anime Thursdays. 4th of July in the United States, so we are going to enjoy our 4th of July and take that day off, so we will not be with you Thursday. Saturday, we will be back with a WWE Premium Live event recap. It will be Money in the Bank live from Toronto, Canada. Really excited. Looks like it's going to be a really good card, so we will be back. Rachel, I believe, will be joining us for that one as well. That'll be coming up at approximately 11:30 p.m. Eastern Time once that Premium Live event wraps up. And then we'll be back on Sunday as well for another episode of Music Weekly. My guess is you will probably hear from us a little early on Sunday. Probably will be 5 or 6 o'clock in the afternoon or evening because there is an NXT Premium Live event Sunday evening as well. We're not going to do a podcast after that one, but we will potentially talk about that in future podcasts if there's anything noteworthy that comes out of that Premium Live event. So we'll be with you on that Sunday for Music Weekly, but it will probably be 4, 5, 6 o'clock. We'll let you know, but it'll be a little bit earlier than normal. We're going to get to the vault, and of course, Mike and I each kind of have our gimmick with the vault. Mike is going through the alphabet each and every week to give you one of the classic albums that influenced his music fandom. I am going through year by year, starting many weeks ago now. We started with 1969 with the Chicago Transit Authority. We're going to come full circle on that today. But before we do that, let's talk about maybe one of my favorite albums that you've picked so far for the vault this week. What have you got for us?
Yeah, so we finally arrived to the letter S. Interesting side note to that is before I started this gimmick of going alphabetically week by week, my original 2 vault picks both began with the letter S, so I already kind of had a jump start on this letter. So I think episode 1, I picked Shadow Gallery's Carved in Stone. Episode 2, I picked Scar Symmetry's Pitch Black Progress. Both great albums. Check them out.
And Symphony X would have been a pick that could have fit here as
well.
well.
I do have some Symphony X. Inferno is a great one. What is that other album that I can't think of the name of? Not important right now, but Symphony X, very good. But anyway, that kind of took 2 of the bands out of the picture, out of the running for this week's vault. So I mentioned before, I've kind of wanted to stick for this first run through is kind of bands that were influential earlier in my music fandom and things that I was into, like maybe as a teenager and young adult. I listened to this band so many times on the way driving to school. I know our sister has heard them way too often due to the fact that when I was a senior, she was in 7th grade and I drove her to school. This is the second studio album from the Coral Springs, Florida hard rock band. Some might call them a hair metal band. I think that would be totally doing them a disservice. They are hard rock, if not kind of alternative. The album is The Lizard and the band is Saigon Kick.
Yeah, I think it's kind of encouraging in a way that their Wikipedia lists them as hard rock, heavy metal, and alternative rock, because to me, they only get defined as hair metal because of when they came out, but really, if you look at it differently, they were almost one of the forefathers of what I would consider to be modern alternative music that started in the mid to late 90s, because I think a lot of those bands took influence from Saigon Kick.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as far as their influences go, I would look at a band like the Beatles, where the band like the Beatles, they could basically write any kind of song and you would just hear it and say, oh, that's a Beatles song. They could go so far around the spectrum of rock music at the time, and no one cared. I think so many bands, historically and today, they have this signature sound that puts them in this box where if they deviate a little bit, people get irate. And I was kind of torn whether I wanted to pick this album, 1992's The Lizard, or the self-titled debut from Saigon Kick, because both of which are just so all over the place with their sound. It's kind of unfortunate in a way that they did make it big mainly off of the power ballad on this album, Love Is On The Way, which is a tremendous power ballad in its own right, but so much of their other stuff is nothing like that. going through this album, you have kind of your heavier tracks, which is notable. I think originally they'd planned on really pushing a song like Hostile Youth as a single, and then Love Is on the Way kind of trumped it. But you have heavy tracks like Hostile Youth, Body Bags, Peppermint Tribe, The Lizard, All Right. You have kind of more of the mainstream pop rock kind of tracks like Feel the Same Way, Miss Jones, and Chanel. And then even softer tracks like God of 42nd Street, Love Is on the Way, and All I Want. The only commonality between all of them is kind of that vocal style. Lead singer Matt Kramer at the time, and probably even more so to a degree, Jason Bieler on backing vocals. They just had a way to sing that sounds like Saigon Kick. Like, that's just what they do. It's kind of interesting. This was the last album to feature Matt Kramer. And to this day, they don't get along very well. They did reunite briefly in 2012 and did a small tour, I think. But it kind of came up in the headlines earlier this year when Jason Bieler was going to tour as Saigon Kick to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the Water album, which is the one that came after The Lizard. But obviously, Matt Kramer wasn't a part of that album, so was not going to be on that tour. And there was this huge kind of blabbermouth article spat between the two. And looking at the Wikipedia pages for this band, it's clear that Jason Bieler was kind of the main creative force behind it. He's the guy that it's like, unless otherwise noted, he wrote all of it. And as far as the music went, he pretty much did write all of it, and the majority of the lyrics as well. Even produced their second album, this album. So, you know, it kind of became his band, I think, over time, and that's why they had the issues that they did. But it worked out pretty well because he was so prevalent in the backing vocals. When he did decide to become the lead singer after Kramer's exit, it still kind of sounded like the same band. It worked out well in that regard. But yeah, I could go on forever just talking about how awesome this band is, but really you just kind of have to check them out yourself.
Yeah, this album is great. Feel the Same Way is one of my favorite Saigon Kick songs, and it's on this album. But as you mentioned, their initial album, there's a lot of really good stuff on there. One of my all-time favorite rock songs, Love of God, is on that first album.
Yeah.
And it's so... it's such an interesting song to me. I really enjoy that one. Come Take Me Now is a really great song on that first album.
Really basic guitar line to that song is just easy to play, but so cool sounding.
And it's interesting that Jeff Scott Soto sang backing vocals on their initial album. So
I didn't realize that, but kind of funny considering they're like such good friends still and have even toured together playing Saigon Kick songs among other things.
Yeah, and then I guess that's not a huge surprise. But yeah, these guys are so good, and I sometimes wonder if this band had started in 1997, if they would have been even bigger, because they would have they were ahead of their time.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any question about that. They were not a hair band. Their music, I mean, they may have some songs that have some similarities with some of the other bands that get classified as hair bands, but they're not a hair band. They're just, like you said, I think they're an alternative rock band. Unfortunately, what they were an alternative to in 1992 and 1993 was so popular that they kind of got lost in the shuffle, and I think that probably also didn't help probably the differences in the band, because you were kind of constantly battling these grunge bands and these hair metal bands kind of as they overlapped in that early to mid 90s session. But yeah, people should check out The Lizard. People should check out Saigon Kick. The original, The Water's really great too, and obviously a little bit different, but not too different from the first two. But these guys are great.
Yeah, it's funny. I was considering picking their greatest hits for the vault because it gives you such a great selection of really their first four albums or so. Just a great indication of what their sounded like throughout their career. It's funny, you kind of mention how they got lumped in as hair metal and all that, but it's like, I think you see why their first album really didn't make much of a buzz, because there isn't a hair metal track on that album. Like, you don't have Love Is on the Way on that one. You have softer songs, but I don't think they fit into that box like they were hoping. Like, I mean, to me, Come Take Me Now is certainly just as good. My Life's a
My
great
Life,
song.
yeah.
But there wasn't that obvious, here's the song that if you didn't know any better was performed by Extreme and not Saigon Kick. But Love Is on the Way is kind of like that.
Yeah.
It's that kind of clean guitar acoustic sound, just, obvious MTV hit.
And it's a shame because there weren't any singles listed on that first album, and it's probably because some of that stuff, some of it wasn't heavy in the sound, but some of the lyrical content of a song like Come Take Me Now, very, very heavy. Clearly, the person singing this song is struggling and is feeling like his life is at an end and is ready to go, like he's just done. Probably didn't help get that on the radio.
No, probably not.
It wasn't until grunge bands sung about that kind of thing that all of a sudden it was cool and trendy. But when a class or alternative rock band sings about it, it's not. But I love this band. It was great to see them on the list for the vault, and everybody should check out Saigon Kick.
Yeah, and even Jason Bieler's more recent stuff is Baron von Bielski Orchestra. They have a couple albums, and I think are working on a third. But the dude is just super talented. He had some solo stuff too that he did recently, kind of leading into the von Bielski work. I've always enjoyed his singing, and the songwriting has always been there as well.
Yeah, 100%. Saigon Kick, awesome. Jason Bieler, awesome. Definitely check those guys out. But The Lizard is Mike's official pick for the vault this week, so make sure you check that out. I am continuing on through the years. 1984. I mean, there were some mega albums in 1984 that I did not pick. Obviously, the easiest to come off the top of your head, Rockwell. He kept trying to get me to pick Rockwell. I did not pick Rockwell, unfortunately. Probably the album that would be off the top of everybody's head would be 1984, the Prince album, which had a ton of his hits on there. It's a great album. Definitely worth the consideration. If you're a Bruce Springsteen fan, you know that Born in the USA came out in 1984. If you listen to this podcast, you know I'm not going to pick that album. There are a couple of decent tracks on there, but I'm not a Springsteen guy.
Van Halen would have been.
Van Halen would 100% have been a great pick. Here are some of the things, you're looking at. Love at First Sting came out in 1984, which included Rock You Like a Hurricane, Big City Nights, Still Loving You from the Scorpions. Certainly would have been a good choice. Heartbeat City from the Cars. You've got Drive. You've got You Might Think. Good stuff on there, but again, didn't make the cut. One that was probably neck and neck to make the cut was Don Henley's Building the Perfect Beast. Maybe one of his best solo albums, which included The Boys of Summer, Not Enough Love in the World, All She Wants to Do Is Dance, Sunset Grill. The list of artists that performed on this album, because I think you think immediately like, oh, it's Eagles people, but it's people: Lindsey Buckingham, Randy Newman, Belinda Carlisle, Patti Smith, J.D. Souther. Of course, there's an Eagles connection. I mean, just a who's who in music was on that album. Great album. Didn't pick that one. Out of the Cellar by Rat was 1984, which
that's
had
great album.
That's a great album. Wanted Man, You're in Trouble, Round and Round, In Your Direction, She Wants Money, Lack of Communication, which is one of my favorite Rat songs. Would have been a good pick. A couple of off-the-wall picks. The soundtrack to the movie Spinal Tap, This Is Spinal Tap, came out in 1984 with, Tonight I'm Gonna Rock You Tonight, and Big Bottom, Sex Farm, Stonehenge, Listen to the Flower People. Those guys are great. Definitely worth checking out. Mike threw this one into the Discord, and so it was really close because I have an affinity for like 70s and 80s country acts, especially the band Alabama, and their album Roll On was released in 1984 with a couple of my all-time favorite songs, including Roll On, which was the opening track, and if you're going to play in Texas, you got to have a fiddle in the band. Man, that might be one of my all-time favorite country music songs ever.
It is certainly up there. That they were immensely talented. Also, Wasp's self-titled debut came out in 84. Dia's The Last in Line.
Yeah.
2 options as well.
Yeah, that was a great one. One other album, which doesn't make the cut, but I know Chris will be excited to hear this one. Probably the best song of 1984, which came out on an album maybe people wouldn't necessarily think of. Came out on the album Chinese Wall, which was the third solo album by American singer Philip Bailey. And, of course, the song is Easy Lover. the duet with Phil Bailey and Phil Collins, which is one of my all-time favorite songs. Just great stuff. That was released on Phil Bailey's album. Chinese Wall came out in 1984.
Deep Purple, Perfect Strangers came out in 84.
Yeah.
Tremendous album there. Knocking at Your Back Door, Perfect Strangers. Great songs.
Yeah. 84 was loaded. Every year's loaded pretty much from this point on. But to kind of come full circle, as someone who got into Chicago in the 80s, now Chris is going to be stuck with Easy Lover for the rest of the night. You are welcome. As someone who really got into Chicago with the music of the 80s and late 80s, early 90s, I knew I was going to come back around and pick them again. Of course, I started with them in their 1969 release, Chicago Transit Authority. That was really music I got into well after I got into this kind of music from Chicago. Released in 1984, it was Chicago 17. It was the 14th studio album. So, yeah, I don't know. I assume there were like 3 live albums in there as well. But it is still Chicago's best-selling album with over 6.1 million copies sold as of 2023 in the United States, United Kingdom, and Japan. 4 singles from the album, all were in the top 20 of the Billboard Hot 100 charts. 6 times platinum for this album. Even the songs that aren't singles on this are so Chicago. And there's some that sound so 80s as well, where they clearly were influenced by all the synthesizers and stuff, but there's just some great horn rock songs on this album. But, of course, the singles people know, Stay the Night is a great Chicago song. Hard Habit to Break. Along Comes a Woman, probably my favorite modern Chicago song. You're the Inspiration, which obviously was a slower song, but a big hit. But, I mean, stuff on the front, We Can Stop the Hurtin', Only You, Remember the Feeling. Those are all really good songs. Please Hold On, which was co-written by Lionel Richie, was on the B-side of that album. Of course, you had, started to see, this I believe was the last album with Peter Cetera, but you could see Cetera kind of taking over. He sang lead vocals on all 4 of the main singles on this album. Robert Lamb sang a couple. You had Bill Champlin singing a couple as well. It's interesting, you mentioned on Wikipedia that there was a demo version of Hard Habit to Break with Robert Lamb on vocals that I guess exists, that maybe they were thinking about him singing it instead, but it ended up being Cetera, which kind of told you where the band was at that time. Of course, he would exit, and the band continued on. I mean, they continued to release really good stuff. Chicago 18 came out a couple years later, which included If She Would Have Been Faithful and Will You Still Love Me. They also did a cover of 25 or 6 to 4, and then Chicago 19 with I Don't Want to Live Without Your Love, We Can Last Forever, Look Away, What Kind of Man Would I Be? So it's not like they stopped making hits when Cetera left, but I feel like the mega hits kind of dried up a little bit after he left, and of course he went on to do solo stuff. But I picked this one because, like I said, I was a huge fan of Chicago, and these songs were the songs that kind of got me into the band, so it was kind of an important time for me to become a Chicago fan. So your thoughts, Mike, on Chicago 17?
Yeah, it's a great album for sure. I'm I had plenty to say about it, but now I'm kind of curious about the Chicago 18. Like, did they really re-record 25 or 6 to 4? And if so, what's it sound like?
I would play it on here if not for fear that we might get zapped, but evidently, according to the Wikipedia page, it was a high-tech remake of 25 or 6 to 4.
That could be really awesome or terrible.
It says Jason Scheff, it was the first album he was on. Scheff recalled when he asked Foster on the way if she should sing the song. The latter responded just like Cetera, so I would imagine it sounds similar at that point. But, of course, David Foster was the producer. He was involved in, you talk about another guy who just did so much and involved with so many different musicians over the years. The list is too long to even begin to name, but some of the biggest albums and songs of the 80s and 90s, and even like continuing on with like Michael Bublé in the 2010s. Like, this dude's clearly still a huge deal in music. But I love Chicago. It's one of the bands that I have not yet seen in person that I would still like to see at some point, even though I know they've had some different members in and out. But
They'd have to. They've been around for 80 years.
They have. And I feel like Peter Cetera is still around somewhere. I know I feel like there's talk every once in a while about, will he ever get back with the band? But this was one of those cases where they didn't boot him out. He just kind of went on to I don't say bigger and better things, because Chicago's still rolling along, but clearly thought he was bigger than Chicago.
Yeah, and understandably, when you kind of get those mega hits that they had with him, like I'm sure there were any number of studios calling him up like, hey man, we got like 4 movies that we want you doing soundtrack songs for, like we just need you to step away.
Yeah, and again, can't blame the guy, but Chicago continued on, and this is kind of that jumping off point, but again, the hits are huge. So that's why I went with Chicago 17 for 1984.
It's not Rockwell, but it's a good choice.
We're just going to have to wait till the next time we come around to 1984 and see if Rockwell makes the cut then. But great stuff this week, as always, on Music Weekly. That's going to wrap things up for this edition of Music Weekly. Thank you to everybody. Thank you, RPG's been in the chat for the first time. Thank you for joining us for this, and we appreciate listening in on this. And thank you to everybody who tuned in. It's been a great opportunity to talk a little bit of music and be able to just kind of go through some new stuff, go through some old stuff, talk about some of the stuff that really influenced us. That's why we really enjoy doing this show. Just a quick reminder, no podcast Thursday. Enjoy your 4th of July if you're here in the States. Enjoy your Thursday if you're anywhere else in the world that doesn't celebrate the 4th of July. But we'll be back on Saturday for WWE Money in the Bank post-premium live event recap. We'll have that for you approximately 11:30 p.m. Eastern Time on Saturday night. And then Mike and I will be back with you for another episode of Music Weekly. We're going to be looking at the music of June the 21st next week. So excited to see what Mike has cooked up for us for next week. So definitely check that out. A big thanks to Stove Lake Media for their continued support of the podcast. Big thanks to Chris for holding down the chat for us as he does each and every week. And he'll be back with us soon. Again, busy life right now. He'll be back with us. We appreciate him jumping in the chat, and I appreciate putting Easy Lover in his head for the next few hours, so I hope he enjoys that. That's going to wrap things up for this week, and we'll be back with you again next week with another edition of Music Weekly. And until then, for Mike and the entire crew, I'm Matt saying so long. Don't forget to join the Empire, the Nerdcast Empire.